of the New York Preservation Archive Project. Neither snow, nor Zoom, nor COVID, nor outages of Gmail shall stay us from our appointed gathering round.
Nice.
I can see we've already got the peanut gallery in action here. But really, truly, welcome to our 17th annual Bard Birthday Breakfast Benefit. It's really great to see all of you here. I hope that after everything that 2020 has thrown at us, that you are safely ensconced somewhere with your coffee in hand, looking out at the Greenlandic wastes around you. But what is NYPAP all about? Why are we here? The New York Preservation Archive Project exists, and I'd like to think of it really like this Zoom. Picture a Zoom set of grids full of historic buildings, historic neighborhoods, and historic preservationists. They go off as far as you can see, but they're all on mute. NYPAP's role is to unmute all of those stories of preservation, the tales of how those historic buildings and neighborhoods in this city somehow managed to survive to the present. So our job through oral histories, through our encyclopedic preservation database, through collecting papers and saving them and getting them to the proper homes, and through programming, all of that is our way of unmuting the story of historic preservation to make sure that it's audible and that it's told and that it's recorded. So we're really happy that you're able to be part of that and that you're here helping us do that work going into the future. So I want to say that our program is going to be a very interesting one today. We have several different parts to it, but I'm now going to turn it over to someone that you all know, someone who has certainly been a bedrock part of saving preservation history in New York City, the founder of the New York Preservation Archive Project, Mr. Anthony C. Wood.
Woohoo! Well, thank you. I think I've been called many things, but first time I've been called a bedrock. So, you know, I'm willing to go with that. So I think now everyone is being unmuted because we are going to do what has become a new, relatively new tradition. Thanks to generous donors, we have named tables after their favorite preservationist. And by the way, if your favorite preservationist isn't called out, then next year you'll want to be one of those generous preservationists to underwrite a table in their name next year. So here we go. He valiantly tried to save Luchow's and the Dvorak House, but he miraculously saved Ladies Mile. Let's hear it for Jack Taylor. And ring those bells for Jack. And he was the heart.
Jack. Yeah.
Hey, Jack, we all miss Jack.
And his
The
scotch.
heart and soul of the effort to save 227 Duffield Street with its history of the Underground Railroad. So let's ring those bells for Mama Joy Chatel.
Yeah.
There we go. He was the architect behind one of the city's first adaptive reuse projects, the Jefferson Market Courthouse. Who could that be?
Joe
Cavalieri.
Cavalieri. He was wonderfully feisty publicist and advocate for St. Bart's, Suburban Homes, and much more.
Joyce Matz.
Who left a fund to support preservation advocacy? Yes, the ever uncompromising Joyce Matz. He started the Columbia Preservation Program.
James Martin Fish.
There we go. Whose graduates, by the way, are well represented on this call. He saved his beloved Longwood in the Bronx, advocated for landmark designations in Harlem, and that would
Tom
be
Best.
the smiling Tom Best. Decades, the pleasantly persuasive preservation and planning guardian angel of the Upper East Side, the truly legendary
Helena Rosenthal.
The fifth chair of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, who successfully steered it through St. Bart's and other major challenges, who just passed away months ago.
Gene Norman.
His preservation legacy includes both saving Federal Hall and Castle Clinton. He fought Robert Moses and won.
Yep.
The great George McAneny.
Yeah.
My lapel, I have my McAneny pin. Behind every great man is a great woman. In this case, one with interests in civil service reform and women's rights. In addition to raising their 6 children, ring those bells for George McAneny's wife, Marjorie Jacobi McAneny. For almost 2 decades, she was the legal rock and tireless advocate.
Dorothy Minor.
Dorothy Minor.
Yes, Dorothy Marie Minor. And finally, to the well, no, not finally yet. She helped educate the nation to the importance of preservation and provided major assist in the efforts to save Grand Central Terminal, St. Bart's, and the Landmarks Law. The First Lady of Historic Preservation, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And now finally, the grandfather of New York City's Landmarks Law and the namesake for today's breakfast, the man I can literally talk for hours on end about, the ever wonderful Albert Sprague Bard. So ring those bells for all of those great individuals. And now we're going to move back from sharing the screen now that we've done the roster of the preservation greats. So preservation history is being made every day, and today is no different. It's quite possible that some of the people on this call weren't even born when I became the chair of the New York Preservation Archive Project. Though by nature, preservationists are exceedingly cautious about change, after 22 years as chair of the Archive Project, I am morphing into a new role.
What? No.
No.
You got muted.
Can't hear you, Tony.
And he's making a big announcement, I think.
Go back. You're muted.
Unmute, Tony.
Go back, go back, go back.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Can hear you, Tony.
Yep, don't worry, we'll get him. Don't worry, we'll get him and we'll have him rewind. 1 second. There we go, Tony. Are you all set?
I am.
Okay,
You
You were on the verge of telling us what you were going to do next, Tony.
But you obviously thought
this is
better
the
of it.
advance write-up because I'm freeing up my time to write the long-anticipated, much-demanded book on Albert Bard.
Hooray.
So take your vitamins. It will probably be a few years, but hopefully this
Yay.
frees up more time. So anyway, now I ask you to ring your bells to welcome and introduce to all of us the new chair of the Archive Project, an internationally renowned preservation expert, advocate, educator, and nonprofit leader. Let us show some love for the one and only Lisa Ackerman. Lisa.
Hey, woohoo.
This is where Lisa appears. Lisa.
One moment, we'll find Lisa.
She's muted.
Yeah, if she could unmute.
Well, now I can unmute because the gods of Zoom have unmuted me. Thank you, Tony, for that incredible introduction. I really don't know how Tony managed to convince me to say yes to the invitation to be NYPAP's chair, but thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Brad, for once again putting together such a wonderful Bard breakfast. You know, it's daunting to follow Tony, and I hope I can do just a fraction of the good work he did as chair. Fortunately, I've been following Tony for years. He's been my personal Cicero through the preservation world. He's set a high bar, and I know I speak for everybody at the Bard Breakfast this morning when I say we really owe him a great deal of thanks for his dedication over the years. And he's not going away, he's staying on the board, and so he will still very much be helping guide NYPAP, but just with a little less responsibility to carry it all on his own shoulders. I'm going to be very brief so that we can get to our great program this morning. And my goal as NYPAP's new chair is really to ensure that we still have opportunities to highlight those essential parts of the field, particularly in New York City, that illustrate preservation binds us together in profound ways. When NYPAP started, we encouraged everyone to document the preservation movement. And we didn't just mean the wins and losses, but we really wanted to tell the story of engagement, especially the hard work of people who invested so much of their own passion into protecting our environment. And as the field has evolved, we've learned over and over that preservation is more than buildings, more than bricks and mortar. It's the history of our communities, it's the confirmation of our values, it's the places we cherish, and more often than not, it's not because of aesthetics that drives us. It's the inspiring people who've changed the way we understand history and the people who push us to be the best citizens we can be. And I think our program this morning emphasizes especially something that I've always felt very strongly, which is preservation is about the here and now. We talk about the past a lot and we talk about saving the past for the future, but really preservation is about reaffirming how we want to live today and what are those memories we want to bring with us collectively as we move through the world. And I love coming to the Bard Breakfast every year, even though it's early in the morning and even though sometimes you're braving, snow or transportation snafus, but I always see the friends and colleagues who really embody the best of preservation and passion. And even, I know this will be a scandal to Tony, even if we only think about Albert Bard once a year on his birthday, his legacy is the tenaciousness of those assembled here this morning. And, we did have snow this morning, but fortunately, most of us are sitting in warm, comfortable places. And yes, as Brad alluded to, there's, Zoom and internet issues and, foraging for coffee early in the morning. But here we all are together, and I'm really glad to see so many friends gathered this morning. And the breakout rooms were a great chance to catch up with everybody, just like we do when we're at the Yale Club. So hopefully we'll all be together next year. And I'm really looking forward to continuing Tony's legacy. And now I'm very, very pleased to introduce Adrian Untermyer to say a few words about George McAnegy's career. Adrian, like George, can be described as urbanist and advocate. And as with George McAneny, those words do not do justice to a legendary figure in New York City's history, nor do they do justice to Adrian, who has shown similar tendencies to George McAneny to think broadly about what strengthens our cities. So thanks to everybody for being here this morning. And now over to Adrian.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic.
And we can see the slides.
Perfect. The furrowed brow, the quizzical glance, the look of somebody who cannot quite place the name, and from some brave souls, a sheepish question. Who? These all used to be the ways people would react to the name George McAneny, an early preservationist and civic leader. George loved nature, and George loved the finer things in life. He had a flair for the dramatic, and he was always impeccably dressed. He served as Manhattan Borough President, was the godfather of the 1916 zoning law, and helped make sure that Gotham would be a subway city. His first big project was pushing for the original Pennsylvania station. And one of his last was preserving Federal Hall. And for those efforts, a plaque now graces the first floor of that structure. And his legacy remains with us to this day, for he founded or led RPA, MAS, the National Trust, and the New York Times, among many others. But over the years, the man became a mystery. Eclipsed by later advocates and lost to time. Lost, that is, until an ancestor stepped in. Kay Siganovic, his great-granddaughter. Kay organized an army of McAneny's contemporaries. She went to his old haunts and brought in new allies. She strategized, organized, modernized his legacy. And she inspired a generation of young preservationists to follow in his footsteps. So who was George McAneny? To answer the question, we need look no further than our honoree today. Guiding hand, a dependable voice, and a convener who brings preservationists together. Or as that plaque might put it, protector of historic places, leader of a city, and friend beyond compare. Kay, congratulations. We so appreciate your leadership, and thank you. And it is now my privilege to introduce Paul Edmondson, the president and CEO of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, who joins us live to deliver the Archive Project's Preservation Award. Paul, welcome, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Adrian. As Adrian mentioned, my name's Paul Edmondson, and I serve as the president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And it's a real pleasure to join you all today, as we at the National Trust are certainly fans of the New York Preservation Archive Project and its efforts to inspire preservationists with our movement's own history. It's also, I have to say personally, it's just great to see so many old friends and colleagues from my many years toiling in this field. New York has always been the center of preservation for so many of us, and the lessons we've learned from your work in New York and have taken across the country is, it's just been a real gift to the rest of the country. So it's a real honor for me to be asked to bestow this, this award, the Archive Project's Preservation Award. First of all, because of the company with whom this award is associated. Past award winners have included luminaries like Robert Stern, Joan Davidson, Barbara Lee Diamond-Steen, Spiel Vogel, Otis Pratt Pearsall, the Durst family, Janet Park. The list goes on, and it's extremely impressive. But I'm particularly honored because this year the award goes to someone whose efforts have lifted up the legacy of a forebear who was not just important to the story of historic preservation in New York City, but also crucial to the story of the founding of the National Trust. That historic figure, a co-founder of the National Trust and a comrade in arms of Albert Bard, as you've heard, was George McAneny. Some of you are aware that for many years, I was general counsel and I was corporate secretary at the National Trust. And in that role, I was the keeper of some of our founding documents and historical records. One of those records was the early history of the National Trust, written by none other than David Finley, our first chairman. And these are the words he begins his history with. The history of the National Trust for Historic Preservation began in the late autumn of 1946, when George McAneny came to the director's office in the National Gallery of Art to discuss with me the creation of a national organization for the preservation of sites and buildings of architectural and historical interest in this country, somewhat like the National Trust in England. So the rest is history. I think it's fair to say that absent that conversation at the National Gallery, I might not be here to present this award. So it seems most appropriate that the awardee this morning is none other than Kay Signovic, who founded and leads the Friends of George McAneny and who inspired the Year of McAneny that led to programs, talks, scholarship, and exhibits in 2019, and who catalyzed the recognition of spirits of McAneny, many of whom are with us today, and many of whom have been involved in saving Federal Hall, a building that was really preserved, saved from destruction, almost single-handedly, as you heard, by George McAneny. Kay's tireless commitment, her work to build coalitions, and her enthusiasm for the preservation legacy of her great-grandfather are a model for all of us to follow. Her work has given us a more complete picture of the preservation efforts of our predecessors, providing us with windows into New York City's civic soul. Her great-grandfather, shown on screen with Kay when she was an infant, would certainly be proud. Kay joins us today from her home in South Carolina. She's come a long way since the day she stood as a child with her great-grandmother, Marjorie Jacobi McAneny, in the vestibule of Federal Hall for the unveiling of a plaque honoring George. It stands there to this day, but it's the work of Kay and the Friends of George McAneny that has brought it to life. On behalf of the Archive Project, it's my great honor to award Kay Signovic the 2020 Preservation Award. Congratulations, Kay, on this well-deserved honor. And it asks that you unmute everybody so we can cheer her.
Congratulations, Kay.
Am I now unmuted? Yes,
You
I
are.
am. Ooh, thank you,
Congrats.
Paul, for that introduction and presentation of the award. I am totally overwhelmed, and I really appreciate the Board of Trustees of the New York Preservation Archive Project for bestowing this award on me, but I also accept it on behalf of our team, the Friends of George McAneny. And in keeping with our Star Wars theme early this morning, Paul, thank you for zooming this award down to Charleston for me. I really appreciate it. The Millennium Falcon has delivered. One of our most dedicated members has been Adrian Undermyer, who you've just heard from. Adrian, thank you again. You've done a masterful job sharing his legacy. And as our webmaster, our curator for our exhibit, and our writer and editor extraordinaire, I really thank you. And I'm so glad that Lisa also has picked up on the idea, as I've told Adrian many times, he will be the George McAneny of his generation. He is an outstanding young man, and keep your eyes open because he is going places. Several of you have wondered about my backdrop for today. No, it's not my home. This is a beautiful estate in Charleston, South Carolina, my home, called Drayton Hall. Drayton Hall is owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and it also has a link to New York City and our own Tony Wood. Tony has been a trustee of the Drayton Hall Preservation Trust for many, many years. And I want to take a few minutes because what's important to me in preservation are the people. And I'm particularly interested in how people have influenced us and have taught us. And so this morning, I'd like to acknowledge the work of Tony and the people at Drayton Hall who have worked together and endeavored and created an award-winning program to teach the whole story about Drayton Hall and its people who live there. One of their initiatives was to bring together descendants of the owners and of the enslaved people for formal meetings as well as informal meetings. And one of the times that they met, they were a panel discussion at the College of Charleston. And afterwards, one of the students wrote, "It was the most beautiful act of forgiveness I have ever seen. Never before had I witnessed history resolved in such an elegant and hopeful manner. There was so much love between them all that I felt as if we too were being welcomed into the family." So Tony, thank you for helping us in Charleston understand our history and be able to understand the significance of our history today. And also thank you for the work that you've done to help bring my great-grandfather to life, to help our family who had never heard of him before. Paul, you recently wrote that uncovering history is not just for archaeologists. Anyone can uncover forgotten stories that provide a more complete understanding of our own narrative. That is the story of the Friends of George McAneny. A few years ago, my husband and I visited Federal Hall to see that plaque. And I decided after our visit that it might be helpful if I put together a one-page document about the achievements of George McAneny that the park rangers could use as part of their tour when they tour Federal Hall. And meanwhile, up a little bit further uptown, Tony Wood and the Board of Trustees of NYPAP were interested in exploring the legacy of George McAneny. They hired Charles Starks, who was a city planner and on the faculty at Hunter College. And Charles took that ball and ran with it. He went to Princeton, he went to Cornell, he went to many places in between to research George McAneny. And he developed a monograph, which we use constantly as a reference. And he's also done many presentations around the city. And Charles, we are totally indebted to you and the work that you did to help us get moving along on this. And at one of his presentations, I believe it was at Federal Hall, one of our dear McAneny family friends from Lake George, John Werner, found out about it. And so he emailed the family and said, guess what? There's somebody else who's interested in George McAneny, and they're doing a presentation. Imagine that. And so that is how our family came to be able to work with NYPAP, and this is how the story has started. Our group has since grown exponentially. We now include lawyers, government officials, not-for-profit administrators, preservationists, city planners, architects, authors, college professors, extended family, a marketing professional, and a New York City tour company owner. We are uncovering the forgotten stories we believe illustrate why McAneny was so beloved and admired during his lifetime as a civic leader in New York City. Adrian mentioned several examples and had all those beautiful slides of some of the places where McAneny was a part of. He's in New York everywhere. We've been happy to share our work, his accomplishments through the exhibit that Adrian was the curator for, many speaker programs. Gail Addis wrote about McAneny's work in Upper Manhattan. And that one-page document I was thinking of doing, that actually happened, and with the help of many, many people, especially Jillian Youngblood. And thanks to Shirley McKinney, it is now available not only at Federal Hall, but at Castle Clinton, so that others can learn more about the history of George McAneny. And last fall, Brad Vogel, Lori Price, and Shirley McKinney did a masterful job because there was a major storm blowing then as well. And they quickly changed the venue and orchestrated a program to honor about 150 New Yorkers who are following in McAneny's gigantic footsteps. And we are really pleased that they are doing this work. They are involved with planning and zoning, preservation, law, political offices, and educating a new generation. George McAneny's spirit does indeed live on. Thank you again for this honor. It continues to be a remarkable journey. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kay. And again, congratulations to you. This is a most well-deserved award, truly. And it really is incredible to hear your words and to have seen what you've managed to pull off. I think that's the thing for me that really strikes me about your effort, Kay, is that you are not a government official. You were not the head of a well-funded organization. You decided as an individual to collaborate and cooperate with anyone and everyone you could find who was interested to make this happen. And I really think that if you look back at what George McAneny was really good at and what he really excelled at, it was precisely that thing, bringing people together, sometimes disparate people, to take on a real battle. So again, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
All right, we are now going to bring up something that you may have seen as we were advertising this event. There was a mention of a special award. Now, we never specified who was going to get that award. All we said was that it was the McAneny Medal. Now, the McAneny Medal has not been given out for not years, but decades. So it is especially exciting to see this happening in the course of our Bard Breakfast. Kay, right now it looks like for some reason the video on your screen is not working, but we can hear you loud and clear. So we are going to put up the image of the medal. Here we go, the very fine medal. And now I'm going to turn things over to Kay to bestow this medal. Kay, go right ahead.
Hey, thank you, Brad. This award was originally established by the Board of Trustees of the American Scenic and Historic Preservation Society in 1945. And although McAneny tried to discourage them from doing this, he was quickly overruled by all his friends. The American Scenic and Historic Preservation Society, affectionately known as ASHEPS, was created in 1895 as New York's first organized preservation lobby that also was national. Although their primary goal was to protect, sometimes they purchased and cared for sites, keeping them open to the public. According to McAneny's oral history at Columbia University as president of this organization from 1942 to 1950, McAneny helped lead efforts to preserve many places in New York, such as Letchworth State Park and Draper Park on Hastings-on-the-Hudson, as well as around the country. For instance, they worked with Congress to prevent the sale of 20 forts around the country. 2 of those on the chopping block were to be Fort Moultrie and Fort Sumter right here in Charleston. I can't even imagine not having these critical forts available to teach tourists and children about our history. You've already heard about some of McAneny's exploits and that most importantly, he encouraged others to join him. His comprehensive coalitions were so important, especially when obstacles were put in his way. His encouragement, perseverance, and even good-humored craftiness kept everyone focused on the prize, sometimes for years. So it gives me great pleasure to announce that the Friends of George McAneny have voted to award the George McAneny Award for Outstanding Leadership in Historic Preservation for 2020 to Shirley McKinney. Shirley is the superintendent for the Manhattan sites cared for by the National Park Service. Shirley has been with the Park Service for 40 years, beginning at the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore and at Mount Rushmore. When she came to New York City, she worked at Gateway Staten Island and the National Parks of New York Harbor. In 2005, she became deputy superintendent, and in 2007, she took the reins as superintendent and has guided and championed the work of her park rangers at 9 separate historic sites in Manhattan. When we started our group, Shirley was one of our first members, and she has been a strong advocate, leader, and friend. Without her enthusiastic ideas and efforts, we would not have been nearly able to accomplish as much as we have in such a short time. And as George McAneny did, Shirley built strong coalitions, or has built and continues to build, the strong coalitions developing programs and initiatives to preserve the historic nature of the Manhattan sites. She and her staff work tirelessly and creatively to educate tourists and New Yorkers alike about our rich American heritage with all its wonders and its flaws, so we may learn to be better citizens and keepers of our history. Shirley, I am thrilled wherever you are on this screen. I'm delighted to Zoom to you the George McAneny Award for Outstanding Leadership in Historic Preservation. I know your staff, your family, your colleagues, everyone who knows you and has worked with you know all too well how much you deserve this award. And I know George would be very proud of you as well. So congratulations, Shirley, and ring those bells, everybody, if you can. Shirley, I know you're there somewhere.
I'm here. I'm here. Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning to the New York Preservation Archive Project members and friends of George McAneny and everyone in the rooms, wherever we are. I extend sincere thanks and appreciation. Thank you, Kay, for that lovely introduction. My team and I are truly honored to accept such a prestigious award. Now, I don't know if you can see this. Can you guys see this? I have zoomed. Wait a minute. You guys have.
We can see it.
Me. Okay, very good. All right. So, what a beautiful award. It really is gorgeous, and I really am appreciative. Thank you so much. So, as George McAneny moved through his career, he did so without partisan politics, without a desire for personal gain, and with a genuine concern for the health and living conditions of New Yorkers. He also worked tirelessly to support the preservation of historic structures, including but not limited to Federal Hall and Castle Clinton. In October 1950, Mr. McAneny gave a speech, "The Fight to Save Castle Clinton," documenting his decade-long effort to save the castle and the battery from destruction. Castle Clinton is one of the best examples of adaptive reuse. Although it was built as a fortification to protect New York Harbor, it went on to serve many purposes, including an entertainment center, an opera house named Castle Gardens, an immigration station until Ellis Island was built, and an aquarium until it was slated for demolition to make way for the Brooklyn Battery, now named the Hugh L. Carey Tunnel. As you can see in the photo on the screen, I hope it's there. Is it there? Yeah, okay. His efforts paid off just in the nick of time. Because of Mr. McAnany's efforts, Castle Clinton was set aside, reconstructed, and added to the National Park System, along with Federal Hall and other grand parks such as the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone. Our rangers proudly educate visitors about Mr. McAnany's accomplishments and his efforts to save both sites as they pause near his commemorative plaque installed at Federal Hall. Next slide. Today, I am so very pleased to announce that in honor of Castle Clinton's 75th anniversary, the castle was selected as a featured park in the Passport to Your National Parks 2021 Passport Stamps. National Park passports are similar to the passports that many of us use when traveling internationally, and I can't wait to use mine again. Our passports are stamped at each destination to memorialize our trips, and National Park passport stamps serve that same purpose. It's a way to celebrate America's national parks with collectible stickers that feature photographs and interpretive text that capture each location's beauty, history, and character. Even now, park visitors continue to turn to the Passport program to inspire their next adventure and to preserve memories of the parks they have visited. Without George McAneny, visitors would have less place-based educational adventures, an incomplete understanding of the city's history, and fewer unique places to preserve in a place of honor amongst their families' memories. I am very proud to further Mr. McAnany's legacy by supporting cultural preservation and conservation efforts throughout New York City and our nation for you and future generations. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Shirley. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, really. And truly, I have to say, Kay mentioned it, but last fall when we were having the Spirits of McAneny event that was supposed to be outdoors at Castle Clinton, a storm blew in, and you were clutch, I must say, Shirley, in pivoting from an outdoor event at Castle Clinton to an indoor event at Federal Hall, literally with about 3 hours to spare. So thank you again profusely for making so many good things happen around the city.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right, you're most welcome. And we will now move on to a brief intermission, but I want to explain something to you of what's going to happen during this intermission, because you should definitely not shut your Zoom down or leave. We're just going to add something to the mix. Now, for 30 years, from 1891 to 1921, George McAneny was active in the pursuit of improving the lives of African Americans through education. He promoted efforts as a journalist and later was actually a fundraiser and trustee for two institutions, Tuskegee and Hampton Institutes. He became friends with Booker T. Washington, and they stayed at each other's homes while traveling. And it was during the memorial service for McAneny at Federal Hall in 1953 that several students from the Hampton Institute came to New York to sing gospel songs in celebration of his life and legacy. We wanted to incorporate a bit of music for this program today, and Kay asked her friend Crystal Hayward to help us bring a bit of that gospel sound with a bit of a twist to help us. Crystal is an international gospel recording artist who has been a singer, songwriter, and pianist serving in music ministry for over 30 years, and she'll be singing two songs for us. One in the break here, and one at the end with, I think, just the right note to head off into your day with. The first song is a tribute to George McAneny, Pennies from Heaven, which was popular in 1936 and composed by Arthur Johnston, but the lyrics have been rewritten by McAneny's great-grandson, David Loud. So definitely pay close attention to the lyrics in the song. David's been a musical director, vocal and dance arranger, orchestra conductor, and actor in a multitude of Broadway and off-Broadway productions. His list of credits is a mile long, and he has shared his knowledge as a faculty member at the Yale School of Drama, Fordham, and Manhattan School of Music. So please follow along and join us as Crystal sings David's tribute to McAneny. Now, the way this is going to work, to preserve the quality of the audio and the visual of Crystal singing, we are going to place a link to her singing in a YouTube format in the chat on the sidebar. So all you have to do is click on that. It will pop open a video. You can watch it at home. We're going to keep you all on mute. And once you're done with that, then you can come right back and we'll proceed into the panel discussion portion of the show. So if you have any issues, and again, if you do happen to fall off of the Zoom, don't forget, you can always get back in using the exact same link that you entered with. So hold tight, and we will queue up the song here for you in the chat in a moment.
They're still listening to us. Right?
Did everyone make it back? Like it? Brad, can you hear me?
It looks like it, Tony. I think everyone managed to get back.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed our selection. And again, Kay Siganovic, thank you so much for making that possible. And a special thanks to David Loud for those fantastic original lyrics. And also a special thanks to Crystal Hayward for that beautiful performance. Really something really fun to have, I think, in our archive to help tell that story about George McAneny's legacy and preservation. At this point, we are shifting into phase 2 of our program today, and I am very pleased to bring up one of our new officers of NYPAP. She's been involved with NYPAP for years and years and years, but she is now our secretary as of a recent board meeting. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gina Pollara.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us.
Oh, Gina, actually, let's get you. Let's get your audio working here.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Gina.
Yes.
Oh. Okay, now I'm unmuted, right?
Let's see if we can get, okay, you can hear it? Okay.
Yes. Yes, okay. Thank you all for joining us this morning. That was really fantastic. What a voice. I love the lyrics too. That was great. We're very excited about the panel we've assembled called Collecting the Now, COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter. We'll hear from representatives of several institutions that have been in the thick of collecting efforts for the past 9 months, who will share examples of how to archive things as preservation battles unfold. Our moderator today is Deborah Schwartz. Deborah is the former president of the Brooklyn Historical Society, now called the Center for Brooklyn History. She is an independent consultant and a veteran of our Bard breakfasts. Deborah will introduce the rest of the panelists and will be putting their full bios on the chat. Deborah, take it away.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Brad. This is just a very special and extraordinary occasion. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of it. As you heard, I am the former president of the Brooklyn Historical Society, which has just very recently become a part of the Brooklyn Public Library. And I'm very pleased that it will continue its mission as the Center for Brooklyn History. So all of our efforts around the preservation of Brooklyn history will continue, and it will be my pleasure to watch that and help to nurture it and make it succeed. This is really an extraordinary and impressive group. Congratulations to Kay for your well-deserved award today. I'm remembering fondly our celebration of Nancy and Otis Pearsall last year at the Yale Club. Nancy and Otis, needless to say, have taught me most of what I know and understand and believe in about the importance of preservation. Collecting the Now, Pandemic Times and Black Lives Matter, the subject of our panel this morning, is a critical part of our work this year and frankly into the foreseeable future. By the end of March, Brooklyn Historical Society had begun our own COVID-19 collecting initiative, which continues now in tandem with the Brooklyn Public Library. With all of the upheaval that we have experienced this year, We are very fortunate to have this remarkable group of professionals join me today. They are all people who are committed to history as it is being made, to thinking about preservation and preserving these moments so that we will all have the opportunity one day when we step back, when we have time to breathe again, to reflect on the meaning, the significance, the lessons of this work that is being done. We don't have a lot of time this morning, so I'm going to do very brief introductions and just set up this panel so that you have a little bit of understanding of what we're doing, and then we'll plunge into a set of questions. Our panelists today are Aaron Bryant, curator of photography, visual culture, and contemporary history at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Welcome, Aaron. Nina Nacional, the director of library operations and curator of printed collections at the New York Historical Society. Nina, welcome.
Thank you.
And Dr. Rob Snyder, who is the Manhattan Borough historian and professor emeritus of American Studies and Journalism at Rutgers University, Newark. Welcome, Rob. It's good to see you all. Just a couple of points that I want to underscore before I start to ask our panelists to respond to some questions. You can, first of all, find more information about each of them in the chat. We have links to lengthier biographies. They are an impressive and formidable group of people. And they have also provided us with some links to articles that they have either written or think are important to the discussion we're having this morning. And I would encourage you to keep those links and look at some of that material after this panel. I also want to encourage you, if you have questions, to put your questions in the chat. Brad is going to help us to sort through those and respond to some of those questions shortly as we come to the conclusion of our comments. And finally, I just want to make one comment about the topic that we're tackling today, which is in some interesting way not one topic. As we prepared for this meeting, one of the things we talked a little bit about was the fact that while COVID-19 and this terrible pandemic have intersected with an incredibly vibrant push towards Black Lives Matter, and all that that means in terms of activism and activating our deeply needed political conversation. The fact of the matter is these are two separate issues, and we need to both understand how they've intersected, but also to understand that each of them has a distinctive historical context that will also need to be analyzed over time as two separate things, even as they have, for all of us, been connected in time and space. So I just wanted to make that comment for us to keep in the back of our minds. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about why these collecting initiatives are so important. I'm going to ask Aaron to start us off. Aaron, perhaps you want to reflect a little bit on your experience with other situations where people didn't understand the value of collecting around particular historical events.
Yeah, well, I would say that one of the things that we really believe, and most certainly I believe, is that history happens before us every single day. You know, we generally think of history as something that happened a certain number of decades ago, but you know, we walk among history each day of our lives. If you think about the reality that the Civil War happened during people's lifetimes, the Civil Rights Movement happened during people's lifetimes. So all the events that we consider historical were actually happening while people were alive. And we never think about how much sense that makes. We think that in order for something to be considered historical, it had to have happened a certain number of years ago, but no one can really define how many years, decades, or centuries has to go by before something's considered historical. So with that understanding, as a historian, I've taken a look at the things that we consider to be history making and things that change the course of history, whether locally or nationally or globally. They all have certain things in common, and I call them paradigmatic shifts. They change the way we think about things. If you think about architecture, for example, the architects and the buildings that are part of a historical canon are the ones that really changed our ideas or our perspectives on what could be done and what's possible. And so in history, you look for those paradigmatic shifts, the things that change the way we think about who we are socially, culturally. They may change the direction of an entire field, for example. And so not only have those things happened in the past, they happened right before us. And so when looking at events like what we've gone through this, the past several months, whether with COVID or looking at protests or some of the other events that have happened just politically, we realize that we're witnessing history. And as curators, as historians, we have to take note of that. I recently did an exhibition on the Poor People's Campaign, and luckily there were curators who recognized that it was really important to collect during the campaign in 1968. The Poor People's Campaign was Martin Luther King Jr.'s final crusade, and he didn't make it to see the campaign launch. He died just about 10 days. He was assassinated 10 days before it was scheduled to launch. There were curators at the Smithsonian, as well as sociologists and collectors in other places, like when I did my fellowship at the New York Public Library, it was at the Schomburg, where they collected materials related to the Poor People's Campaign. And luckily, those people recognized that that was an important historical event. Because even at the Smithsonian, there were people who did not want to collect on the Poor People's Campaign because they were thinking, well, what are we going to do with all of this material of these poor people who just came to the mall and camped out for 6 weeks? Luckily, there were curators who had a different take, and so they brought stuff in. They saved it and they stashed it away in some of the storage facilities. And then years later, it was found and figured out, oh, this is stuff that folks picked up from the Poor People's Campaign. Another curator, anthropologist at the Smithsonian went out and he conducted about 7-8 hours of interviews with protesters, children singing songs and telling jokes. It was really, really incredible that these folks went out and collected in spite of the fact that really the Smithsonian wasn't really sure whether or not it was worth collecting. And luckily they did, because 50 years later, I was able to do an exhibition based on the stuff that was brought in and sort of hidden away. And so, the lesson there, particularly for contemporary history and people who are interested in historical preservation, is that history happens before our eyes every single day, and we have to learn to recognize it. And preservation is even preserving the new.
Thank you, Aaron. That was great. I take another lesson away from that story, which is it's important sometimes to break the rules, right?
And push the envelope.
Oh, yours is a more polite way of saying.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to note here that the breadth of collecting that's been happening is really quite remarkable. People are collecting oral histories, photographs, artwork. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, ephemera. And Nina, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about a particular kind of collecting that you're interested in, which you describe as digital ephemera. Which I find so incredibly fascinating. And I'd love for you to say a few words about that.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm going to just start with a little bit of a prelude, which is to say that, and I want to emphasize and add to what Aaron said, history is all around us, and we have to collect primary sources so that future researchers and curators have these sources. And they are both personal expressions like poetry and diaries and photographs, but also that things around us that we may not even see, but are there. So things like subway posters saying how to wear a mask. We have a newsletter from a group of women at the Queensbridge Housing Complex, and it's entitled Pandemic and Social Inequity. Just things like FTC warning us about COVID scam, and then of course all the emails coming in the last few days from healthcare providers telling us all how we can get our vaccines. And that segues into digital, which is that I realized how quickly things were happening in March in terms of the pandemic. And things were changing not just daily, but hourly in terms of what do we do? What is this? You know, what is going on? And I was receiving emails that when viewed sequentially are going to tell a story that could be missed. The details could easily be missed, you know, 5, 10, 50 years from now. And also based on my work collecting after 9/11, I realized that what I kind of mundane primary sources, things like applications for small business loans or a list of mental health resources, something like telling restaurant owners how to set up outdoor dining. These are all online, but paper ephemera is not the only kind of ephemera. There is such a thing as digital ephemera, and these things are not going to be online indefinitely. So we need to preserve them. We need to get them now. And I think they very much complement the actual physical formats that we're collecting that are coming into us by mail and shipments. And of course, especially during lockdown, being able to collect things by email or digitally was really important because we couldn't go out.
Are there tools that you have developed or that other people are developing that have helped you to do this kind of collecting of the ever-changing digital?
Right now, we're just taking it really as we would anything else, which is monitoring closely and systematically, methodically, and downloading and saving as PDFs. I should emphasize, we're not downloading web pages. There are institutions like Library of Congress that archive web sites, but we're looking for PDFs that are intended to be downloaded and to be distributed and posted. And many of them, the agency will indicate where they should be posted, whether it's a school, a hospital, a homeless shelter. So it will say these kinds of signs, these kinds of flyers for distribution here and there. We're working slowly on, we know what we need to do in terms of preserving, storing. Digital resources need as much care and preservation as physical sources. So that is in the works.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Nina. We also talked, as we were thinking about how we wanted to have this conversation today, about the challenges that our institutions are facing as they create these collecting efforts. And Rob, you brought up something incredibly interesting that I'd love for you to talk about, which is your surprise at the amount of response that you were getting from people as you put out a call for collections. And I wonder if you could talk about that and how that's both something wonderful and positive, but how it also creates challenges for us.
So back in April, when it was obvious that we were heading into a really bad situation, a bunch of us put together an email and asked for historians and curators and archivists to come together for a Zoom meeting to talk about what was happening, to talk about both the history of what we were entering into, but also how to begin to document it and understand it. And it was striking to us for two reasons. One is There was a pandemic a little over 100 years ago. It went little documented and little understood in our public life. And I think that's one of the reasons we could stumble into this awful situation we're in now, because there was little public record. So we wanted to make sure that this time around, we got the most expansive collection possible. We also searched for parallels. You know, we talked a lot. What's the parallel? And I thought Josh Brown was absolutely on target when he said the Great Depression, because the Great Depression is large enough that it could be transforming, but it could also be the context for other events. There were uprisings in Harlem during the Great Depression. So we also see the Black Lives Matter movement in the context of COVID, and they intersect in important ways. What we've seen is our larger institutions like the New York Historical with Nina, like the Museum of the City of New York and the New York Municipal Archives have done wonderful work documenting the pandemic at different levels, at the height of city government, at the community level, and in photography and in video. But what we also notice is that community organizations are popping up doing things all the time. Every time I stick my head up, there's another project going on. There's a memorial, there's an oral history, there's a narrative collection that's going on. And a group of us are in the COVID NYC documentary project, trying to work together to create a clearinghouse so that these things that come up from the grassroots level don't get lost, so that they can find a common home someday. That home might be online. It doesn't have to be in a brick and mortar institution. But I am concerned that the great outpouring at the grassroots level finds a place where these great resources can be stored for the future, 2 years, 20 years from now, when we ought to understand the pandemic in its fullest possible context, from both the top down in city and state government and from the bottom up at the community level.
That's great. I just would comment that, you know, obviously these Herculean efforts take enormous resources. And, you know, we've seen Ford and Mellon sort of step up and acknowledge that, and other foundations as well. But there's clearly a great need. And so that's something that we all are quite mindful of and need your support and your thinking and your ideas about how to tackle that. Are there other challenges? Nina, you had mentioned to me that, you know, just the pure challenge of collecting during COVID when people need to be careful. Aaron, Nina, would you, either of you like to comment on that?
I would say that we would have liked to have been out in the field more. We would have liked to have made site visits and people who were interested in showing us things. We did look a lot of things online, but it's different, very different than going to visit with someone and speaking with them. And so that was one of the sad realities of 2020, that if you went to a march or a rally, which I would never have hesitated to do before this year, because people were not wearing masks, some people were not wearing masks, then you could become ill. So that was a loss. But and also as the sheer amount of response, you know, and not being in a physical place to coordinate everything and organize everything is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges for us as well. We've gotten pretty good responses from folks who would like to donate objects, and the objects can be really huge. You know, murals have popped up all over the country. There's a huge mural movement, of course, because you combine COVID with businesses being shut down and then protests. Well, businesses and cities want to protect businesses and the buildings, particularly in downtown areas. So they boarded up the buildings. And then artist collectives came in and they started painting. And in many cases, municipalities work with artist collectives specifically to paint murals on these boards covering up businesses. And so you have murals all over the place. And so then the question becomes, how do you preserve these murals? What happens to these murals when they come down? Because they do represent something really important in history. COVID, first of all, and the impact that COVID had on businesses, but also the protests, and how different parts of communities, businesses, protesters, artists, municipalities, they all came together to sort of respond to this moment. And that's represented in these artifacts, these murals. But how do you collect them? You know, just to get, as a museum, we would have to get, say, artists to help pack and ship, artists, movers, art movers to help pack and ship all of this material to us. How much do we collect? How do you store it? We would have to get crates made. And before you know it, just to collect one mural, you've spent, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. And, you know, there are thousands of murals all over the country. So how do you make a determination as to then which mural gets preserved? So dealing with those kinds of issues. And then as Nina suggests, with our museum shut down, we don't have the physical folks there to help sort of coordinate all of this, to take care of the shipping and to get the bids out to different art shippers, or to send out shipping labels to folks who would like to donate banners or protest signs, that kind of thing. So it's really been hard to coordinate all of this from home, rather than being out on the ground and being able to talk to people and collecting things as it's happening. And then going back to, you know, your office and coordinating with folks in your building.
Let me just jump in on that. Two things that I've come across talking to curators and archivists here in New York City. One is that obviously so much of the reminiscence and communication around COVID is digital, but things like Facebook posts, when they try to archive them, they run into copyright questions. What if somebody's posted a New York Times article with a comment? Does that violate copyright? So that raises a big question for people. The other is documentation. In New York City, if you look at the neighborhoods that have been hardest hit by the pandemic, many of them are neighborhoods of immigrants, and some of those folks are undocumented, and they want to contribute to the record, but they don't want to be identified in a way that could put them in legal jeopardy. So that creates all sorts of things that archivists and curators have to think about.
Thank you. That's great. I can't believe it, but we're actually running out of time. I want to leave some time for Q&A. But I want to end with your comments on one brief, you know, but very, very important part of this, which is what we think about how future researchers are going to use these collections, or, you know, what are the possible and probable uses that the three of you are hoping for in the future. It's I think this is a good way to close our part of this conversation. Nina, do you want to start?
Well, sure. Well, I do think it's all about primary sources and the details, and trying to get, let's say, the raw materials for researchers and curators, and not have it go through a filter of, say, a book or a newspaper article, you know, just as it happened. You know, this has been a year of, you know, are there any facts left in this world? And I think it reminds us that we really need to just, you know, as it was generated, whether it's by an individual, a group, or an organization, to try to get that, and to try to get as many different perspectives as possible, and optimally as many different formats too, because this is all around us. You know, everyone on this Zoom meeting, what we're taking in today, there are things around us that could be saved and preserved to tell this story, and we need to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, going back to my research on the Poor People's Campaign, thank goodness they, you know, the Schomburg had quite an extensive collection of papers. I would say probably had, outside of perhaps the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library, the Schomburg probably has one of the best archival collections on the Poor People's Campaign that I had seen. And thank goodness for that. They ended up collecting the papers of a sociologist who went out with a team of sociologists and students to do so much research, demographic research on the folks who were coming to the campaign, who were getting on buses in different parts of the country. Even, you know, information about the license plates of certain cars and buses that you can then track back to, you know, oh, well, who was driving this car to help bring protesters to Washington, D.C. from Alabama? So, you know, collecting now and collecting those things that we think are unimportant to a researcher to 50 years later to recreate that story is going to be really important. And as Nina says, we want those primary sources as opposed to having to read a book and then going back to check to see if the author of that book actually got it correct. And how do you do that? That's really important. But I would say, you know, not just in the near future, I mean, in the distant future, but even now, talking about murals and thinking about architecture and preservation, there are in DC, for example, we were working with the Chamber of Commerce, a historic building, of course, and looking at working with St. John's Church, another historic building right there at Lafayette Square in Washington, DC. And the murals that they have, how do we find homes for them? So the Chamber of Commerce, for example, is looking at, there are entities in DC that are looking to collect some of the murals, some of the panels, and then installing them as part of the architecture as public art, particularly with new buildings. And how do you create this public art out of these murals within this new construction? And so immediately the building becomes historic because of these panels in a way. And so looking at ways that we can save some of the materials even today so that it's useful.
It's great. I think we're gonna, oh, Rob, I think just for the sake of time, if you don't mind, I'm gonna let Brad toss us some questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to our panel. For a moment here, I think we do need to mute because that was some great conversation and some great insights. So get those bells ready and let's hear it for our panel.
Thank you.
Deborah, Aaron, Nina, and Rob.
Thank you.
All right, very quickly here. Well, I think we may only have time for about one question. I know folks have days to get off into. This is a question from Jeffrey Kressler. When you collect, do you collect with a specific interpretation in mind, a particular point of view toward the events? So I guess very briefly, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would say as a curator, you know, as an archivist, probably not. And I kind of hope not as an archivist because you really want that unfiltered. As a curator, you know, curators are particularly in the visual arts. When you think as a visual arts curator, you know, all visual arts exhibitions are very much filtered through a certain lens, you know, a story that wants to be told. And exhibitions are often done that way as well. With my collecting, this go round, I was less interested in focusing on conflict and confrontation and looking to collect to represent those moments of peace because I thought the moments of peace would get lost. So looking at banners and murals that talk about peace, that talk about humanity. I'm looking at a mural, for example, a beautiful mural on St. John's Church that's done like stained glass. It looks like stained glass. And it says, we are all different colors of the same shade. You know, so collecting something like that takes precedence for me. Or even a banner that says, I'm paraphrasing, love kindness, walk with your God, and, you know, vote for peace, you know, something like that. So thinking of how would I like to shape a very particular narrative and memory of this moment, since we can't collect everything, and understanding that many people will probably collect around conflict. What's the other side of that most people might not collect on?
Okay, well, Aaron, I'm going to take that as the definitive answer.
Oh, sorry. Can we hear from the other panelists? I'd love to hear what Nina and Rob has to say.
Well, I would say that optimally there is never any point of view or slam. We just get everything. But something my group has been talking about is, you know, are we getting all different points of view in terms of specifically politics and Black Lives Matter? And sometimes it's very hard as a librarian, a curator. You have to collect and at least try to collect from groups that you may have huge disagreements with and maybe don't even want to acknowledge. My colleague in the museum, Rebecca Clausen, went, I worry about her sometimes. She's been out in the field too much, but I think she went to Staten Island to the public house where there's a sort of rallying point. No maskers and Trump supporters, and gathered some materials there. So I think it really is our job to get the widest variety of materials and perspectives. And then I like that Aaron differentiated between an exhibit and collecting initiatives, because a curator selects. And when you're selecting, you are selecting towards a presentation that you want to make to a message or a history.
I would just add the importance of collecting documents at all levels of government, because it's obvious that the relationship between New York City and New York State is crucial to understanding the history of how this pandemic unfolded and was experienced. And I think to write a total history of this pandemic, which I hope somebody will do someday, you're going to need to understand Albany and City Hall and the grassroots levels in our communities to see the relationship between the two.
Oh, absolutely. I would just add to that, the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library was really important to my research on the Poor People's Campaign, because every single document, government document, and every letter that came to the government, every hearing, every, anything related to federal governments was collected, and it helped me to shape the story from multiple perspectives.
Thank you all so much.
Yes, we could definitely have an entire additional program just focused on these conversations, because they are very relevant, they are very meaningful, and they certainly mean a lot to really our future understanding of this peculiar time we find ourselves in. So once again, thank you, Deborah. Thank you, panelists, for all of your insights today. We really appreciate that. All right, it is my pleasure to bring up one of our new officers. We have a whole crop of new officers. This one is our new treasurer, Shirley Ferguson Jenks. So Shirley, welcome to the stage.
Great, thank you, everyone. It's my honor to serve on the board of NYPAP. I've forgotten how many years. I need to preserve my own records here. But my job here today is to thank you all for supporting NYPAP. If you haven't had an opportunity yet to give this year, we'll make sure that posted is an opportunity to do so right now. We can certainly use the support, helps us bring on programs just like this. Special thank you to some of our supporters over the years. The Robert A. and Elizabeth R. Jeffy Foundation, thank you, Bob and Liz. Pat Reisinger, the Achilles and Bodman Foundation, the Gary Charitable Trust, and all our very generous co-chairs and benefit committee members. Thank you so much. It's really, this is our most important event of the year, and it's just great, the support that's come forth. We have a special announcement, which is to congratulate the Preservation Database Competition prize winners. This is really neat. It's the first time we've done this. It was a contest put together by our Reisinger scholar, Peter Sommer. Forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong. And this is adding new entries to our encyclopedic record of New York City's preservation history. So our first prize winner was Katie Marie Foster of Columbia University. Her winning entry was on the late Mama Joy Chatel of Brooklyn. Second place winners were Rachel Erickson of Columbia University also for an entry on Selma Ratner. And third place was Katie Uva of the City University of New York for her entry on Ruth McAneny Loud, which is terrific. Thank you. And I couldn't end this without a special thanks to our kitchen cabinet that put this virtual event together. So that was our wonderful Tony Wood, and of course, Lisa Ackerman, Gina Polera, and I had the privilege to serve on this committee as well, which was great, and the staff. Sarah Eccles and the invincible Brad Vogel. I don't know how we do all this without you, Brad. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shirley.
So there you go. And with that, I'm going to turn this back to Brad for that very last song. So thank you, everyone, and be careful out there in the snow.
Thank you so much, Shirley. And yes, thank you to all of you for coming. It truly was just heartwarming for me to see everyone here together, despite all the things thrown at us this year. you're giving me life going into this winter, I must say. So I'd like to wrap things up with one more song as you waltz out into your day. It's just the right mood. It's only a minute and a half, so I'm going to post the YouTube link in the chat for you to enjoy. But otherwise, wishing you very happy holidays and all our best from here at the New York Preservation Archive Project.
Yay.
Well done.